guy I know has dreamt of owning the three-pointed star.
You can dream for a dream car, but start SIP today itself.
A lot of times it's an emotional decision. It's not a practical one. Otherwise, sports cars and fancy cars wouldn't sell in this country.
Are you driving that much that it covers the cost of 14,000 rupees which you'll pay to the cab owner?
Do I want an SUV? Do I want a sedan? There are lots of things to consider.
When it comes to car, you always want to upgrade it.
If I'm spending that 25 or 35,000 rupees, why don't I put it into a car loan?
Hi, thanks so much for joining in. This is Big Decisions and I'm Alex Matthew. You've probably seen a few videos online telling you that buying a car does not make financial sense. It's a depreciating asset and depending on the model, it is sometimes like bringing an elephant home. In fact, if you tally up the cost of ownership of the car and if you compare it with the cost of taking a cab or using public transport, there's no question that buying a car does not, in fact, make financial sense. But there is, of course, the daunting ride cancelled to contend with. Yukta has all of the pros and cons with regard to ride-hailing services that you need to know about.
Thinking about buying a car, or maybe you're braving packed buses, auto rejections, or local taxis with tricky meters. Now, public transport in India can be quite the ride. Sometimes smooth, sometimes a headache. Now, enter Ola, Uber, Rapido, and other ride-hailing apps. But are they really the perfect solution? Let's break down their pros and cons. First up, convenience. A 2022 survey by Redseer found that 70% of consumers actually preferred cabs because they're comfortable and, well, really easy to book. Plus, no hassles of parking or maintenance. Now, Redseer also reported that owning a car in cities like Mumbai or any other metro city could cost users up to 35,000 monthly, whereas using cabs can cost an average user approximately 5,000 to 7,000 rupees. But ride-hailing apps have their own downsides, like surge pricing, which can inflate prices up to 3 times of the regular ones. And well, cancellations. हाँ भैया मैं इधर ही हूँ आप कैंसिल मत करना okay? Hello? Well, local surveys actually reported that 45% of users in 2023 reported regular cancellations. Now, safety is a concern too, because around 30% of women actually feel unsafe during late-night rides. While features like live tracking can actually help, this still remains a concern for some, with reports of misbehavior by drivers actually surfacing every other week. So should you depend on these taxi aggregators or should you plan for your own car? The answer is it depends. But let's dive into that in detail on this episode of Big Decisions.
Now, on this episode, I'm discussing what you need to bear in mind before you take the decision to buy a car in 2024. Because if you're in my city, then the only places that you're spending more time apart from your car is your house and your workplace. Joining me today are Renuka Kirpalani, Consulting Editor, Autocar India and Mashable India, as well as Nikhil Kothari, Director of Etica Wealth.
Thank you for having us.
The first question, and I made a statement, so I'm hoping that you can help me either prove or disprove it. Is there a financial argument against owning a car?
So mathematically, as you rightly said, it's a depreciating asset. So we need to find that what is the amortization cost when I'm buying a car. So let's assume you're buying a car which is worth 8 lakh rupees. And again, when you resell it, you will get 2 lakh rupees. So effectively, you have lost 6 lakh rupees from a depreciating asset.
Yeah.
If you amortize that over 6 years, which will be running use of car, you effectively, there's a cost of 10,000 rupees every month on the car itself. And over and above that, you have a petrol cost, you have your maintenance cost, insurance, and all other stuff, right? So effectively, assuming that that will another cost you 2,000 to 3,000 rupees. So effectively, you end up making 13,000 to 14,000 rupees as your basic cost of maintaining a car. Now you need to figure out that what is your cost of car, what you're driving every day. Are you driving that much that it covers the cost of 14,000 rupees which you'll pay to the cab owner? Or you'll say, no, I'm only using like say 2 or 3 times a month or 4 or 5 times a month, then effectively it may not make sense. You rather always have a Uber, or if you want to drive on your own, you have a Zoom car.
Do you agree with that?
So, yeah, I mean, when you think of things practically, and car buying is like that. A lot of times it's an emotional decision. It's not a practical one. Otherwise, sports cars and fancy cars wouldn't sell in this country.
Yeah.
So a lot of car buying decision is done more emotionally than actually just practically. Because for years, if you remember, diesel cars, if you worked out the maths, they never made sense for the amount of distance you did in a year. And we did those equations many times and told people that petrol makes more sense over diesel. But it was that daily dip in the wallet, or however people perceived it at that time, that made diesel cars sell a lot more. So sometimes I don't think that people think of it so practically. There's a lot of other emotions involved. There are a lot of other things involved. Like you said, ride cancelled. Is it that easy, to actually be everywhere you have to on time? How many times a day do you really use your car and travel from place to place? If you're going from point A to an office, point B and back home, maybe your argument stands true. But if you're someone who has to make 5 stops in a day and every time your ride is cancelled, probably buying a car makes more sense. So I think there's larger decisions that involve car buying rather than just the practical one.
Yeah, absolutely. I buy into that completely, because the decision that I made to move to automatic from manual, having driven a manual car, and I insisted that I would buy a manual car. My first car had to be manual. I was stuck in traffic for an hour and a half before I left the city to go home, which was in Pune. And my dad said, how long have you owned this car? Why don't you move to automatic? And the next day we went to the showroom. It was that quick.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought that I would buy a car. It was that quick. Yeah. So from that perspective, when you do decide, it was probably playing in the back of my head. So you kind of know that you want to buy a car, right? Deciding on the affordability of that car and setting aside a budget for it, how do you determine how much you can spend on a car?
Okay, so basically, see, owning a car is like it's the lifestyle goal. Right? It's not so you want to have a car, and there's no end to the car which you want to have. Yeah. Right? You can have a 6 lakh rupees car to a 6 crore rupees car. Right? So depending on how much you can shell out, you need to buy a car accordingly. I'll always say that you should always first make a goal for buying a car. Start a SIP for that goal, and then you should use that corpus to buy the car.
Before we get into the way that you save that, what I'm trying to get, and maybe I can help ask Renuka to help as well. How do you determine which car to buy? Because you need to identify something that you like, obviously, but it needs to fit your budget, not just in terms of the ticket price, but also everything else that is entailed. Because if you buy an expensive car, you're going to be spending more on the insurance, you're going to be spending more on a lot of other things, which hopefully Renuka is going to talk about. How do you decide how much you can spend on a car?
Okay. So effectively, when we take a home loan, we say your home loan EMI should not be more than 35% of your income.
Sure.
Similarly, when you're taking a car, your overall expenses on car cannot be more than 7 to 10% of your overall income.
7 to 10%. Okay.
That's a maximum what you can have.
Yeah.
Right. So now you need to figure out that what is my income. Based on that, if I say, for example, if my income is ₹1 lakh, and I'm going to spend say 7 to 10,000, say 7,000 to 10,000 rupees on a monthly basis. So then accordingly you need to buy a car. So if I take ₹1 lakh income, then you should not have a car which is more than 7 to 8 lakh rupees.
Okay.
Because that will cover most of your cost of 7 to 10,000 rupees.
Sure.
So accordingly, you need to figure it out. You cannot have a car which shell outs like 20-25% of your income. Then, as you rightly said, you are having an elephant at your home and nothing else.
Speaking of elephants, and this is actually parlance for a lot of people that have tracked the auto industry for many years, there are a few cars that are exactly that, right? They're elephants.
Well, it's perspective, I think, Alex. It just depends where in the market you are. The question you asked is, how do you decide which car to buy, right?
Yeah.
So I think let's begin there. For me, I think a lot of people will message me and say which car to buy, what's the best car to buy. But I think you need to list your requirements. So I think do you drive it yourself? Are many people going to drive it? Is it going to be chauffeur driven? How much is the family use going to be? Is it going to be single owner? I mean, single person driven, or are you going to carry your family along? Do you do a lot of long runs? Do you need to carry luggage? So there are a lot of things that I think there's a list of requirements you need to make in your mind. And once you decide that requirement list, then you can go out and of course budget. Like, what do I want to spend on my car? Is this my first car? Is this my second car? I'm moving up the ladder. Do I want an SUV? Do I want a sedan? There are lots of things to consider. So I think you need to be very clear in your mind, because the consumer is honestly very spoiled for choice at the moment.
Absolutely.
And it can be very confusing. The car buying decision can be very confusing. And of course, you have everybody pushing something at you, right? So I think once you're very clear on your choice, and people often ask me, but you recommended X to Y, and now you're recommending me Z. So why is that? Because it's really requirement based. Someone may prefer driving, someone may want back seat. And in the same segment, there may be two different cars that apply for that. So I think be very clear on your requirements. That's the first thing. And your budget. And from there, it becomes easy to sift through the whole, confusion that there is.
I speak from personal experience when I say that people often focus on the ticket price of the car and not enough on what it costs them after. They also, I mean, of course, you think about the petrol or the diesel that you spend or the petrol that you spend on, but you're not thinking about insurance. You're not thinking about maintenance, various other costs. Can you sum that up?
I disagree, Alex. The
Really?
consumer today is very well informed.
Okay, maybe I'm in the minority.
And they do think a lot of them are worried about resale value. There are very often they won't go for a brand purely, though you say, okay, this is the best car, and they'll say no, but it really won't have resale value. So consumers very, very worried about resale value. They're also very worried about maintenance.
Okay.
And I think that's a large part of why a lot of brands have also had make and break, and in the auto industry do well or don't do well, because they have a perception of being expensive to maintain.
Yes.
So I think maintenance is a big issue for customers. Bad service, high maintenance costs, and you immediately see a lot of shakiness deviation in a brand, because the consumer is worried about that. And honestly, in the kind of country we have, the environment we have, maintenance is a large part of the cost of the car.
But is there a measure? Can you talk about how much somebody should be willing to shell out?
I think on a percentage, it's hard to work out that number. See, there's different levels of cars, and honestly, if you're buying a luxury car, it's at a very different level, and if you're buying a budget car, it's at a very different level. So it's hard to generalize a percentage. But I think that you should get value. Your service should not be something that is an exorbitant amount, because that's something you have to do very, very regularly. It would be wise to examine between the cars that you're buying, what is spare part value. There are a lot of studies out there that are in the market that give you a comparative of maintenance between cars in the segment, and it would be wise to look at that, because I think and it's the reason that a lot of Maruti cars sell in our country, is because maintaining them is very, very easy. Their spare parts don't cost as much, and it's easy to get them. The availability is easy, and you can turn them around quickly. So these are things that you have to consider. I think the cost of how much it would cost you to repair your damaged car vis-a-vis is something that one should consider in a financial decision.
Absolutely.
And it shouldn't be beyond a certain percentage of what you're buying.
Coming to same thing, Alex, the whole idea is that whatever you buy a car, you'll have a lot of choices. But you need to, as you rightly said, you need to have the budget for the overall spending which will go out from your pocket. So at max, if it's beyond 10%, you have to make a wise choice that I cannot shell out more than 10% in the car itself, which includes my maintenance as well as the owning a car. So you should plan in that way that my EMI plus my owning cost cannot be more than 10%.
I think people forget that owning a car is not just, like he rightly said, buying the car. You get your car washed, you have a cleaner that you pay, you have a driver. Very often you have to calculate the chauffeur cost with the car, the service costs that come with it, if it's damaged, something that goes wrong. So you have to budget for that as well in the year, which is what I think sometimes people forget.
That was the point that I was making.
Yeah. So I think you have to budget for, I would even go beyond 10% of the cost, and I would say that when you buy a car, you have to budget for at least maybe 15%. For unexpected expenses.
No, what I mean by 10% of your income. So if your income is a lakh of rupees, you cannot shell out more than 10,000 rupees on a monthly basis on car itself. Because you have so many other goals, right? So for car itself, if it's beyond 10%, you are spending more on a lifestyle goal.
And maybe you have a car that you can't afford at that moment, which does not mean that you cannot afford it in the future. And you were alluding to this point earlier in the conversation. I stopped you from doing that. You can actually plan to own your dream car. It's not impossible to own a Rolls Royce. I know, Renuka is making eyes at me. But having said that, it's good to dream. Yeah.
So I'll give you a real personal example. Okay, in 2011, okay, we saw a movie, and where it was an education movie on SIPs, and where it shows that a little guy, small boy, he started doing SIPs, and some point of time he owns a Rolls Royce.
Wow.
Okay. So that time we thought that, okay, this was a real movie. We want to make a real One Idiot.
Right.
And really want to own a Rolls Royce.
One Idiot was the name of the
I
movie.
need to go to him for financial advice, for sure.
There you go.
So what we did, I'll just give you example. In 2011, me and my brother, we discussed that, okay, we can do SIP of 10,000 rupees every month. So we did this calculation. If we do 10,000 rupees SIP every month, and we increase the SIP amount by 25% every year on year, because as our income increases, we can increase the SIP amount. And if we make 15% return on this portfolio, in 20 years, we'll have 9.75 crores, which will be good to buy a Rolls Royce.
Okay.
So in 2011, we discussed this thing and we implemented that. We started with 10,000 rupees SIP. Luckily, instead of 25% increments, we did 35% in a step-up SIP every year on year. So we started with 10,000, next year we did 13,500, then we did 17,000, and so on and so forth. And luckily, instead of 15%, equity markets has been very good. It gave us 18% return.
Sure.
Okay. And today, if in next 3-4 years, right, which will in 16 to 17 years, I'll have 9 crores to 12 crores in my portfolio.
Wow.
Which will help me to buy a Rolls Royce itself.
Wow.
So my whole idea is that you can dream for a dream car, but start SIP today itself.
And you start with 10,000 rupees.
10,000 rupees. Okay. I kept on increasing my SIPs, and in 16, 17 years, I can have a Rolls Royce.
Hey, what do you think about that?
But it's true, isn't it? It's all about planning and aiming for your goal, right? And whether you do it via SIP or whether you do it via, another way, I think it is that. It's achieving your goal, it's planning and knowing that big financial plan that you have. And I think nowadays, there are a lot of brands, for example, if you take Mercedes, that know that people, like every kid in their life has had a Mercedes poster. Every guy I know has dreamt of owning the 3-pointed star, right? It's a sense of achievement. And they realize that. And I think companies themselves are coming up with financial plans for people, knowing that it may not be something that's so easy to buy now, but let's make it easier for them. So, if you look at Mercedes, they have something called Star Agility, which gives you a lot of variation vis-a-vis just that, monthly X, Y, Z. So they allow you to step up your loans. They allow you to hold them for 2 months in case you have an unexpected expense. There are lots of variation even in financial plans that automotive manufacturers are giving buyers.
And there's also banks that are offering you loans. It's a completely different scenario from what it was 20 years back. Is this, however, a good idea, taking a loan? A lot of advisors will say it's a depreciating asset. Don't take a loan for a depreciating asset. Is that the fact?
So you do look at what exactly you are. Are you a salaried employee, or are you a professional who can use a car as an expenses for his business and claim exemption for interest as well as for the depreciation? Okay. So if you are a salaried employee, right, and you're owning a car, and you're taking a loan, effective loan rate is 9.5% to 10% if I take a 5-year time frame. Okay. So in that case, and if you have to do a post-tax, if you're doing any investment somewhere else, you have to make 11.5% return. So if your investment is not making, if your investment is not making more than 11.5%, then taking a car loan, right, doesn't make sense. Right, because it's better that you use own capital to buy a car. But if you are a salaried, if you are a professional who is using this car for his professional thing, then it makes sense to take a loan, because at 9.5% you claim 35% tax benefit. So effective cost will be 6.5%, and you also get depreciation benefit. So in that case, taking a car loan completely makes sense. But for a salaried employee, I'll say clearly no to car loan, because effective cost 9.5-10% is very, very high. Right, and you don't get any benefit out of it.
So then the question arises, and you started talking about this, you can actually plan it over a period of time. While you're saving for your Rolls Royce, you still need to drive a car.
True.
Right, so how do you buy? You probably buy 2 or 3 cars in that time frame.
See, over a lifespan, you'll buy 5 to 6 cars.
Sure.
Right,
okay.
And you can really well plan for it. And you can, and when it comes to car, you always want to upgrade it. Right? So I'll give you a very simple mathematics how you can upgrade your car throughout your lifetime. So say, for example, start working at the age of 24. Okay. You start a SIP of 5,000 rupees. Okay. And increase the SIP by only 10% every year on year.
That is only for the car?
Only for the car. 5,000 is a very reasonable amount from a car perspective. You do a 5,000 rupees SIP, increments by 10% every year on year, which is 5,000. Next year, you'll only do 5,500, and so on and so forth. Assuming only get 12% return on your portfolio, in next 6 years, you'll have 6.5 lakh rupees. You can use that money and go and buy a car.
Right.
After that, so once you got the car, you start another SIP of 10,000 rupees now. Your that SIP is already over. So you use that first car which you bought at the age of 30 at say 6.5 lakh, and you do a SIP of 10,000 rupees for next 6 years.
Yes.
Right. That SIP will give you 13 lakh rupees at the age of 36.
Right.
And you use your old car, you'll have roughly around 15 lakh rupees car.
So basically, you need to add another 10,000 to your amortization of your car because you're planning that upgrade already. That's something you.
So 5,000, your SIP is stopped in 6 years, right? And
Don't complicate it so much. Don't complicate it so much. You plan for 6 years in a row. And every 6 years, you keep increasing the SIP start point, right?
So you start with 5,000. You keep on increasing by 10% every year on year.
Yeah.
So in next 6 years, you will have 6.5 lakh rupees. You can buy the first car.
Yeah.
You continue SIP.
Yeah.
So that SIP, because you've increased by every year, after 6 years, the overall amount will be 10,000 rupees SIP.
Sure.
Right? That will give you 13.5 lakh rupees in 6 years. Then after the 6 years, the SIP amount will become 20,000 rupees.
Right.
Keep on doing that SIP, you will have 25 lakh rupees in next 6 years. Then your SIP amount by then will become 35,000 rupees. Keep on doing that SIP, you will have 45 lakh rupees. Right? So
here's my question.
Yeah. Okay.
Here's my question.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's my question. Now, to a lay person, completely not in the financial world, not knowing where, because when you say SIP, there are times when the market is up, and there's time when the market is down.
Yeah.
SIP may not give you the return that you thought of, and it's happened.
Yeah.
If I'm spending that 25 or 35,000 rupees, why don't I put it into a car loan?
Okay.
Right?
So, and that's a very good question. You want to take that?
Yeah. So when I'm saying that, so over a long period of time, right? If you hold the SIP for 6-7 years, probability of making that 10 to 12% return has been more than 80-90%, right? So you have always work on probability game, right? And the whole idea, what I'm trying to say is that 35,000 SIP is only for when you're looking at buying a car of which is 55 lakh rupees.
Yeah.
But for a layman, he cannot start with 35,000 rupees. What is only doing 5,000 rupees SIP? This will bring financial discipline him. Right?
And the other aspect that is very important to remember is that the model of the SIP allows you to buy when the market is low and also to average your cost when the market is high. And you keep doing that over a period of time. Of course, you may just be unlucky when you say that 6 years from now, when you want to buy that car, the market could suddenly crash. In which case, you simply push the goal one or 2 years down the line. Your life is not ending when you can't buy the car tomorrow, but the goal is still there.
I think the larger point that he made is creating that discipline.
Yeah.
Is creating that discipline of putting that money aside so that you have a goal that you're aiming at. Like, when you have it in your savings account, it doesn't help. It doesn't work that easy. Yeah.
It also helps you to keep the budget very much clear. If I, instead of 5,000 SIP, if I can do a 10,000 rupees SIP, it allows me to buy a 15 lakh rupees car in 6 years.
So let's actually talk about those budgets, Renuka. For everyone listening in that wants to know which cars they can buy right now, let's break it up into very simple points. So he's talked about, 6.5 lakhs, is that right?
Yeah,
the first one?
First car.
First car, 6, around thereabouts. And I think that is where the affordable segment is at right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a few tough questions now.
I'm going to open my phone because there's so much choice that one has to read it out now. Yeah.
In the affordable category, what according to you stands out as the best value for money buy?
So I think in the affordable category, you have things like the Wagonar, the Quig, the Magnite, the Triber, the Tiago. I think over there, the Wagonar is something that sells a lot because honestly, it's easy to maintain. There's that sense of, I can repair it anywhere with a Maruti brand.
True.
And of course, it comes with great value at that point. And it's not only that, it's a car that gives you that high off the ground, your first car, visibility is good, it's easy to drive. So there's a lot of things going for it that make it a good practical first car buy. But then there's also the Tiago that offers you a lot more space. It gives you a feeling of having bought a little bigger car than actually a budget car. So I think these two would be something to look at. And then of course the Quid and the Magnite and the Kiger actually complete that whole SUV craze that there is in the market, where everybody feels like they need to. They're not genuinely SUVs, but they're little higher off the ground. They
crossovers, you called them.
Crossovers. They're designed to look like SUVs, so people have that sense of, oh, this will go over anything, and I'm safe with this kind of car.
You go to the next segment, and
but
I think that's
the
between
thing to consider.
Yeah.
In this segment, the thing to consider, and what a lot of people consider, and which is why the Wagon-R does well, or Maruti cars do well, is when it's your first car, you really want that peace of mind.
Yeah.
You don't want to be dealing with service issues. You don't want to be dealing with a not great network. You just want everything to be easy, and that's, I think, one of the most important things to consider.
So going to the next leg, and I think that would be
15 lakh rupees.
Yeah. So would that be fair to say that that's the next segment, or would you have to push the envelope a little bit?
You could still do an under 10 lakh segment. So, you have things that are still under 10 lakh that give you a much wider choice. Like, you have the Swift, which is, I think, the largest selling car just now.
Yeah.
The Maruti Suzuki Swift, that's really nice. You have the Tigor, again, Kiger, Magnite and all go into this category as well. You have something called the Grand i10 Neos, the Hyundai, which is also a really nice car to buy. The Punch, the Tata Punch, which is, you have the Hyundai Exter now. So you're really spoiled for choice even under 10 lakhs.
So, but then if you were to push the envelope further and you were talking about 15 to 20 lakhs, you are now looking for more comfort. What according to you stands out?
So you have, I would say if you want a sedan, it's the Skoda Slavia and the Virtus that really stand out to me. Of course, you have the Honda City over there as well, which is an old favorite. But I think over time, these two have come and made the sedan segment a little bit more exciting than they were before.
They're effectively the same car, yeah?
They're effectively the same car, one from Volkswagen, one from Skoda. So, few cosmetic changes and it purely depends on what you like and what looks better. But essentially, undercover, they're the same. And it's the same there. You have the Hyundai Creta, which is, I think, one of the highest selling cars for a reason. It's just offers you everything in a great package. You have the Kia Seltos. Again, same car, different covers. But, these are cars that have done well for a reason. They're well engineered. They give you a host of features. So they offer you, may not be the cheapest cars in the segment, but they offer you great value because they give you a lot for what you're paying for.
Speaking of features, and this is something that has always occurred to me, would you rather advise people to buy the top-end variant of a car, or to settle for the lower-end variant of the car at the same level as a top variant?
Neither.
Really?
Neither. I would not advise anybody to go. I never recommend a low-end variant because very often they're really spec'd to make a price point.
Yes.
More often than not, when you go to buy that low-end car, they'll tell you it's a 4-month wait because manufacturers aren't even making it in that much quantity because they don't expect it to sell.
Right.
It's purely to bring customers into the showroom at a price point.
Yeah.
So you hear $999 and you say, oh,
Yeah,
wow, and I'm going to the showroom. And then you'll end up buying a car that's 13 or 14 lakhs. And I think that's where you need to settle. You don't even really need to go to the top end. Very often the top end specs are a lot of bells and whistles that you don't use or want. It looks attractive and you feel like, oh, I'm getting the best. But look a segment lower and you'll find great value. So I think, look 2 segments under the top end and often you can find great value in what you're buying, and you find that, how often am I really using that sunroof, or how often am I using this, extra sporty alloy or needing that extra sporty alloy. And there's a lot of very cosmetic bells and whistles in the top end.
And of course, the bottom line to consider is the per month cost, which Nikhil stipulated at the start.
Exactly.
And so if it fits the budget.
There's this big craze of ADAS. Let me bring safety.
Yeah,
so,
that's a fair point.
Yeah, and there's this big craze of ADAS and people are going in for a top end because it has ADAS. And when I've asked manufacturers if they've done a study of how many people are really using these functions, half of them are chauffeur driven. Your driver's not using the ADAS.
Yeah.
When you drive the car, sometimes people don't know how all of it functions and it's so confusing for them to begin with. I think a lot of them don't use a lot of the functions.
Sure.
And I think automatic cruise control comes in a lot of cars that don't have the whole suite of ADAS features as well. So sometimes examine this a little closer, find out what it is that you will really use. It all seems attractive, but do your use case.
And you can't use all of those functions on an Indian road necessarily.
Yes, in most cases scenario, I mean, most of us get in and switch that parking sensor off, right? Because it's just beeping way too much.
That's a fair point. On that note, I think we've had an insightful conversation. Thank you so much, Renuka, as well as Nikhil, for taking the time.
Thank you.
And, well, that brings us to the end of this conversation. Let us know what you think, what your first car is going to be or was, and what you're buying next. Do stay tuned. Lots more coming up on NDTV Profit.